When the world feels too loud, there is always a road that leads to quiet. My name is Leonard Frost. Tonight let us take that road together into the hills of Pennsylvania, in a village where time has softened, hearts still listen to the wind. The year is 1907, and the people of Willowmeade, Charles, Eve, Oscar, and Jasper, are just beginning another summer evening. Let's begin. The sun had dipped low behind the hills of Willowmeade. Its final rays turned the dirt road amber, painting the fences and rooftops with the softness of dusk. A faint breeze stirred the tall wild caraway at the edge of the fields, sending seeds drifting like pale fireflies. The little village moved slowly at this hour. Chickens had been tucked into coops, shutters drawn closed against the evening chill. Wrote with a fountain pen, slowly, deliberately. Though known for his wisdom and years, Oscar never stopped learning. Every Sunday, he took time to write down what he de-observed in the week. The names of birds seen, conversations overheard, bits of verse that arrived unbidden. He carved not for necessity, but for the joy of shaping something fine out of something rough. This evening's work was a small bird, its wings just hinted at in the curve of wood. His sleeves were rolled, his brow calm. In the schoolhouse, a slate blackboard still held chalky sums from the day's lessons. And in the post office, a single lantern swung above the sorting table, casting gentle shadows on bundled letters and string. At the edge of town, in a modest cottage with yellow siding and a wide front porch, Charles Howard sat beneath the arbor, whittling, and the river below moved slowly in summer, its banks lined with reeds and drifting cattails. Jasper leaned on the railing, watching the water. Something in the village, in the hills, in the scent of baking bread, in the people held him close. He dreamed often of places beyond Willowmeade, cities lit by gas lamps, ships docked at harbors, voices speaking languages he didn't yet know. Across from him, Eve Hunter rocked gently in an old creaking chair. She rarely spoke, but her presence was a kind of music, quiet, steady, necessary. Their eyes met for a quiet moment, the kind that speaks more than words. A book rested in her lap, though she hadn't turned the page in some time. Somewhere nearby, a barn owl called from the trees. Instead, she listened to the sound of the breeze moving through the lilacs. A short walk down the lane, past the orchard and the well, Oscar Mayhem was seated under a maple tree with a notebook balanced on one knee. Tonight's entry simply read, "A boy stood by the river at sunset, hands in his pockets, eyes full of everything he hasn't yet said." That boy was Jasper Rogers, 17, restless, earnest. He stood now on the wooden bridge beyond town, the one that creaked with age and swayed just slightly when the wind changed. But even as he dreamed, he always returned. Back on the porch, Charles finished his carving and set the little wooden bird gently on the table. Eve looked up. The oil lamp flickered beside them, and down the road, Oscar closed his notebook with a soft sigh, the kind of breath that marks the end of a page, a chapter, a day. Jasper turned at last and walked slowly home. The wild caraway swayed again as the wind passed through. The sky deepened to velvet blue, and one by one, the lamps went out across Willowmeade. Sleep came easy that night, as it often did, beneath the hush of stars. And so the village slept. And so, dear listener, may you too. Some stories unfold like a letter, sealed with care, carried by time and opened only when you are ready. I'm Leonard Frost, and tonight we return to Willowmeade, a quiet village tucked among the hills of Pennsylvania, where every passing season adds a layer of memory. It is autumn now, the year 1907. The fields have turned golden. The nights have grown longer, and a single letter is about to change the shape of someone's world. Let us begin. Wind stirred the dry corn stalks in the fields beyond Willowmeade. Leaves had begun to curl and fall, painting the village paths with warm shades of orange and brown. A soft haze of chimney smoke drifted lazily in the morning air, scented with wood ash and something faintly sweet, perhaps apples baked earlier that morning. In the center of the village, the post office door creaked open, and one pale blue letter addressed in a hand he had not seen in many years. He only held it for a moment. Oscar Mayhem, dressed in a dark wool coat and a scarf knit by his sister long ago, stepped inside. His boots tapped softly against the wooden floor. He tipped his hat to the postmistress, Miss Fairley, who smiled behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Oscar collected the mail slowly, thoughtfully. 2 small parcels wrapped in brown paper, one official-looking envelope. It was a different kind of beauty from summer, quieter, more fragile, the kind of beauty that fades as you look at it. The wind tugged at the corner of his canvas, and the early light cast shadows through the porch rails. His palette held deep russet, ochre, and the soft grays of smoke and stone. She handed one to Charles and didn't ask what he was painting. She never did. He did not open it there. He had been hired to help stack wood for the stove, sweep the classrooms, and deliver small errands. Work he didn't mind. It gave him time to think. And Jasper always had something on his mind, then tucked it gently into the pocket of his coat. Elsewhere, on the porch of the yellow cottage, Charles Howard had brought out his easel. Places with names like Hickory Run and Valley Forge and New Kensington. He didn't know what he'd find there, only that the names made his chest feel strange and expectant. Here was painting the orchard this time, nearly bare now, save for a few stubborn apples and a scatter of birds flitting from branch to branch. From inside the house, Eve Hunter stepped out with 2 steaming mugs. Instead, she sat beside him in the wicker chair and wrapped her hands around the mug. Watching the light shift across the hills, Charles finally spoke, and Oscar's kind voice echoing through the hallway as he read aloud to the older children. A girl named Millie, now grown, living in Pittsburgh. She wrote of books and rain, of crowded streets and gaslight, and how much she missed the quiet of the village. It's different every morning. Eve nodded once. The paper was thin and smelled faintly of lavender. They didn't speak again for some time. On the other side of the village, Jasper Rogers stood behind the schoolhouse, where a tangle of ivy clung stubbornly to the walls. Today, it was a train schedule folded into his back pocket. Not because he was leaving, but because he might. A letter rested on the table beside him, lit by a single lamp. He unfolded it during lunch, running his finger down the list of towns and stops. He put the schedule away when the bell rang. For now, there was still firewood to bring in, chalk to dust from the ledges. That evening, with rain whispering gently on the roof, Oscar finally sat down in his parlor and opened the pale blue letter. He unfolded it slowly. It was from a former student. At the end, she wrote, "I still remember when you taught me that silence can be full of meaning. I hold that lesson close, especially on noisy nights." Oscar sat quietly for a long time after he finished reading. Outside, the village glowed softly in the rain, oil lanterns glowing behind windows, smoke curling from stone chimneys, and voices fading gently behind closed doors. Jasper returned the unused train schedule to the drawer of his desk. Charles finished his painting and set it aside to dry. And Eve, as always, checked the locks before sleep and placed a small sprig of lavender on the sill as her grandmother once did. The rain fell lightly through the night, and the world, so often loud and hurried, held its breath for a while. In Willowmeade, the silence was full of meaning. Sleep came slowly, kindly, as it should. Some nights feel like a beginning, others feel like a memory returning home. Leonard Frost. Tonight, we find ourselves once more in Willowmeade, the quiet village cradled by the hills of Pennsylvania, where the rhythms of life are slow and the silence of winter brings its own kind of wonder. It is December now. The year is still 1907. The first snow has arrived. Let us walk softly there. Snow had begun falling just after noon. It started as a whisper, a slow drift across the pasture hills. But by evening, it had gathered along rooftops, settled between fence posts, and lined the edges of the lane like soft lace. The village of Willowmeade grew hushed beneath the weight of it. Children stayed inside, their noses pressed to windows. Smoke rose steadily from every chimney. Boots were lined in rows near doorways, wet from early ventures outside. Lanterns glowed warmly behind thin curtains. In his kitchen, Charles Howard stood by the window, drying his hands on a towel. He had been preparing a stew all afternoon, slicing root vegetables and laying bay leaves in a pot. The scent of onion and thyme had drifted through the whole house. Beside him, Eve Hunter had lit the oil lamps and trimmed their wicks. Though she rarely said much, she had a quiet ritual for snowy nights. She laid out extra blankets, filled the kettle with water, and wound the clock gently so it wouldn't chime too loud after dark. Charles looked out the window. The street had gone white. Even the river, slow as it was, moved in near silence. Only a whisper of water beneath a skin of ice. He reached out to catch a flake on his glove. It melted instantly. "Perfect night for doing nothing," he said. Eve smiled faintly. Elsewhere at the village chapel, Oscar Mayhem was placing 3 thin candles on the windowsill. Instead, he sat in the last pew, listening to the wind whistle softly through the rafters and letting the light surround him like a slow, wordless hymn. Then he turned and began the walk back, the falling snow muffling his steps. He lit them one by one, each flame flickering against the frost that had formed on the inside of the glass. A few of the school children had left paper stars earlier that week. Small cutouts with jagged and perfect lines. Oscar tucked the stars gently between the candles. He didn't plan to speak that evening. Not far away, Jasper Rogers had wandered down to the river path. The snowfall had turned everything unfamiliar. Branches wore coats of white, and the ground made no sound beneath his feet. Jasper paused at the edge of the bank. In the stillness, his breath made soft clouds in the air. He thought of trains again. Charles placed 2 bowls of stew on the table, and the clock ticked softly in the corner. The trees stood still and reverent. The church bells remained silent. Otta's escaped this time. This time, he imagined the sound of one returning. Its whistle far off, its wheels slowing as they neared the platform. A return, a homecoming. The wind picked up for a moment, and Jasper pulled his scarf higher. By the time he reached the schoolhouse, Oscar was locking up the chapel. They nodded to one another in passing. "Cold," Jasper said, voice soft. Oscar smiled. That's winter's way of asking us to listen. No more words were needed. Back in the yellow cottage, Eve poured hot water into the teapot, letting the steam rise. Neither of them mentioned the snow again. They simply ate in quiet company, the way two people do when they know each other's silence well. The village slept under a quilt of snow. Fences vanished beneath drifts, and every window in Willowmeade held a little flicker of light, like stars come down to earth. As the stars above blinked in their quiet rhythm, those below slowly drifted into sleep. Every morning is a letter unopened, full of quiet promise and things not yet spoken. I'm Leonard Frost, and tonight we travel back to Willowmeade. Once more, the peaceful countryside village nestled among the hills of Pennsylvania. The year is 1908 now. Spring has tiptoed back into the world. The snow has melted, the ground is waking, and as the sun lifts over the rooftops, life in Willowmeade begins again. Gently as always, let us begin. The first light of morning stretched slowly over Willowmeade, turning the treetops soft gold. Mist rose from the pastures like breath from the earth, and the distant hills wore a blush of green, new grass, not yet bold enough to boast. A rooster crowed once, then fell silent again. It was the kind of quiet that asks you not to rush. A kettle whispered beside him, not quite boiling. The bread he had baked the night before sat wrapped in a cloth on the table, still faintly warm at its center. In the yellow cottage, Charles Howard stood barefoot in the kitchen, warming his hands over the stove. One paused, looking at Charles with bright, curious eyes before flying off toward the orchard. He stretched, then moved to the porch, stepping outside just as the sun slipped over the hills. Everything was washed in light. She handed Charles a mug without speaking, warm milk with honey, then joined him in watching the fields come alive. Dew clung to the fence rails and the window panes. A pair of finches hopped along the garden fence. From inside, Eve Hunter appeared in the doorway, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders and her dark hair braided down her back. Eve preferred early walks, before chores began, before the village stirred. He carried a small journal in one coat pocket and a sliver of apple in the other. It's meant for the neighbor's horse who always waited by the gate. Neither spoke for several minutes. They didn't need to. Down the lane, Oscar Mayhem had already been up for some time. The horse whinnied softly as Oscar approached. A cart passed slowly down the lane, its wheels clicking on loose stone, driven by the baker's son delivering fresh loaves to those who didn't tea-bake their own. "Good morning, old friend," Oscar said, feeding him the apple slice. Then he opened his journal and jotted something down. "Some mornings you are not the one waking the world. Some mornings the world wakes you." His coat was patched, but his eyes were steady on the horizon. He smiled to himself and continued walking, boots damp with dew. The sound floated out over the fields like a slow ripple in a pond. It was folded in his pocket, addressed simply to a shipbuilder's office, Baltimore. He didn't know if he would send it. By mid-morning, the village had truly begun its day. Laundry flapped on lines behind houses. Children chased one another between the pump and the gate, their voices light and tumbling. And there, sitting on the school steps with a book open on his knees, was Jasper Rogers. He wasn't reading, not really. He was thinking, the way he often did when the world was just beginning and still unclaimed by anyone else. Eve had taken up her embroidery, stitching wildflowers into the corner of a tablecloth. His boots were muddy. He'd written a letter last night, though he hadn't yet posted it. But he liked knowing it was there. Up behind him, a bell rang gently from the school tower. Jasper stood, tucked the letter deeper into his pocket, and went inside. By noon, the sun had climbed high and warm. Bees hummed near the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a windmill creaked lazily in the breeze. Back on the porch, Charles had resumed his carving, now working on a small box made of ash wood. At the edge of the yard, crocuses had begun to bloom. Inside, the kettle boiled again. The bread was sliced, buttered, and shared without a word. And all around them, Willowmeade breathed. Slow, steady, unchanged. A village waking to spring, came morning that asked nothing. A moment kept safe in time, and slowly, softly, the day carried on. Some lights are lit for others. Some are lit so we remember our way back. I'm Leonard Frost, and tonight, as the hush of twilight gathers, we return again to Willowmeade, a quiet village tucked into the folds of the Pennsylvania countryside. It is now late summer in the year 1908. The fields are tall, the days still warm, but the nights are growing longer. And in a small village where change comes quietly, a single lantern is about to shine a little farther than usual. Let us begin. The sun had just dipped behind the hills when the bell above the post office door jingled softly. A breeze followed, carrying the scent of dry hay and honeysuckle. Her hands, though worn from years of sorting and stamping, were always precise. It came this morning. Baltimore postmark. Oscar Mayhem, steady as ever, stepped inside and removed his hat. Children collected sticks for the bonfire promised that evening. Chickens clucked contentedly in their coops, and shutters creaked closed against the coming dark. "Evening, Miss Fairley," he said with a warm nod. Miss Fairley handed him a letter. Oscar took it carefully, knowing exactly who it was from. She carried a woven basket with jars of blackberry preserves and small cloth-wrapped bundles of bread. Without a word, she handed it to Charles. Outside, the village moved through the last hour of daylight. It was an old tradition, the lamplighter's path. Once a year, families placed lanterns along the winding trail behind the orchard, each one marking a hope, a memory, or a message not meant for speaking, the same one. "The light travels farther than you think," he said, motioning toward the path, "even after we stop seeing it. Worn from being handled, read, and reread." He had yet to post it, and tonight he wasn't sure he needed to. Back at the yellow cottage, Charles Howard was tightening the handle of an old oil lantern. He held it to the light, inspecting the wick, then gave it a thoughtful nod. "I haven't used this one since the harvest dance," he said aloud, though no one was near. Soft voices moved through the trees, and the air smelled of moss, old pine, and river stone. Just then, Eve Hunter appeared on the porch behind him. Charles smiled. "You always know when someone needs something warm." Eve tilted her head in that quiet way she did, half shrugged, half reply, then stepped back inside. As the last light drained from the sky, the villagers gathered near the clearing behind the schoolhouse. Jasper Rogers arrived just as the first lantern was lit. He had the letter in his coat pocket again. Oscar joined him quietly at the edge of the crowd. Oscar sat at his window with the Baltimore letter open on his lap. Jasper didn't answer right away, but he followed Oscar as they began walking the trail, lanterns flickering on either side like stars fallen low, and a chance for someone young, if they could be there by the 1st of September. Each family had brought something different: oil lamps, candle jars, even a few fireflies in glass. Eve and Charles followed farther behind, hand in hand now, a rarity they didn't explain. Jasper paused at a fork in the path. There a flat stone had been set beside a lantern. Carved in the stone were 5 words. "Leave your fear here tonight." He knelt quietly, touched the stone, and took the letter from his pocket. But instead of reading it one more time, he folded it once more slowly and placed it beneath the lantern. He stood. The path continued forward, and Jasper walked on. That night, long after the last lantern had been lit, and the village had returned to its gentle stillness. Inside were simple words. News of a dockside job, a room near the water. Oscar didn't have to ask if Jasper would go. He had seen the way the boy walked the path, but more importantly, he had seen that he returned. In Willowmeade, lanterns flickered low into the night, some left burning until morning. And in one quiet corner of the world, light waited patiently for whatever or whoever came next.